was speaking, I think control is a word that I sort of dip out of. I can't. And when Marianne was speaking, I was thinking about attention. It's like, where do I put my attention?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just coming to the end of a particular stage of parenting. And if I'd tried to control certain stages of parenting, I think I'd have got myself into a pickle quite quickly. And it really was about, where do I put my attention? And to go, and just to grab the surfing metaphor, that's what I tweeted this morning. You know, my Twitter bio says I was going to change it, but it's like whichever way the wind blows me. But I was just kind of trying to capture today, you know, I'm going to have a huge change curve this year. And do I just kind of try to plan ahead of that, try to stay in front of it with some control, or do I just choose to surf it when it comes, because it's coming? And I put my presence, my attention will be better if I surf it, even if I'm a bad surfer, which I know I am. So for me, you have a choice about where you put your attention, and control. If anyone can never explain that word to me, you know, please, you remember that? I just can't. There's something about the word. I just go, what even is that? I don't even know.
Oh, you picked me to it, Jessica. Yeah, the parental thing. I mean, what I was trying to pull together here is this: like, influence is a good word, Matthew, and Marion used it too. It's much better and more helpful than control. It says there are limits to it, and you can only. What was I trying to say? I'm trying to say that a really helpful, God, it's stacking metaphors here, but a really helpful thing that helped me is this idea that ideas and the things we create, that they're their own entities, and they just come through us and out into the world, and they have a life of their own. So I cannot ever hope to have any control over them. They're not mine. I never owned them. I was just a conduit for them, and they go out into the world and they have their own life, like children, Jessica, you know. And having a dog's really taught me that I can't control a dog. I can just influence him, right, Marianne? And then while you were all talking, I was thinking, well, what if me as a work in progress, as a product, horrible word to use about myself, but what if I'm just another one of my ideas and I can only influence myself and not control myself? I don't know.
There's a very real psychological grounding to that experience, that, you know, the experiencing self, the ego, the narrative self, whatever you call it, is all thinks it's everything, and it isn't. It's that's the bit that, when we call the brain riding around, is actually, it's part of something much bigger. And I think that idea that we can influence the rest of everything, of ourselves and the stuff around us, but we can't control it. You know, self-control is such a funny idea. That actually it becomes a working against very easily. I think that perhaps that, for me, is the fundamental thing that's easier, that's different since I started. Well, because for me, like, this idea of transition is an ongoing thing anyway, because everything, it's like it's when did I start this ongoing transitional process, rather than when did I transition. But that is very much a shift towards working with rather than working against. And I think, Marianne, that's kind of what you were talking about with the flow of the tide, or everything like that as well. And for me, applied to the self, it's perhaps more important than anything else. Working with what's there, with what emerges, with what comes up, rather than working against it.
Well, like, even at the level of what you were saying earlier, Matthew, about, like, you know, your version of getting up early is 8:30, you know, or whatever it might be. Like, even just at that small micro level of, like, you know, well, what are my rhythms? What are my natural ways of being in the world? Like, you know, am I going to pretend to myself that I'm someone other than I'm not? And, you know, am I going to try and work in a way that doesn't suit me because it seems to work for other people? Yeah, going with the flow of our own natural instincts, preferences, all these things.
It almost sounds like what we're saying is that self-control is actually a myth. And when we think we're self-controlling, or when we're trying to control ourselves, it's that we're imposing rules and boundaries and things from the outside somewhere in ways that are constricting and cutting off life rather than actually helping anything. It kind of sounds like that's what we're saying.
I'd say we're using an approach that isn't appropriate for the thing that we're trying to work with. We're approaching it as a kind of mechanical system, as a complicated system, when we're dealing with a complex system instead.
Chris, you're welcome to just jump in whenever you want to. Now you're muted, so whatever
Yeah.
you're saying, we're not getting.
No, I know. I'll jump in whenever I can. That's part of the problem. I've left my hand up by accident again. Sorry.
Oh, because it looked like you were brooding over there. So
yeah. Just letting go of control a little bit more. I think that's probably what that face was.
Or is it just resting brooding face? Is that
what yes.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on what we're talking about right now? Control or influence, or
I feel like so many, but they'd be slightly disparate, which is why I pushed the microphone away, because if I didn't do that, I'd keep just jumping in. Because and I'm glad that I didn't, because I've really appreciated this, and I love that. Like I popped in the chat, like this notion, as I'm sure many people do, thinking about the new year, thinking about the promises we make to ourselves, or not necessarily resolutions, but things that we want to try and commit to. And self-control is often something that feels like that's a thing, that's one of the things in the mix. And I love this idea of self-influence rather than self-control. And yeah, like when you were talking about control earlier, I was thinking about exertion as in exerting pressure on a thing, and what that can do, and how that's that changes something in a way that perhaps you don't want it to be changed, and maybe irrevocably. You're exerting pressure on something rather than guiding, nudging, influencing. I think that's really interesting, and much kinder as well.
Sorry, I've gone a bit. I can't stop with the metaphors. It's an addiction. It just makes.
Got another one for us.
I've got another one. Well, it just came to me based on what Mark was just saying there. He was like talking about. It's almost like think about how powerful a glacier is and how kind of slow it is. Versus like I feel like I'm often trying to hammer my life into shape, actually that doesn't generally work. But that there's something about the gentleness and the patience of influence versus control.
It's back to gardening again. It's tending. You're tending to things. You're not, and it's like the other thing that resonated with me is this thing of, I'm really conscious of now at the moment is these planting in November and it may be not bearing fruit until March, and that specific thing of it's under the ground, probably doing a thing. Maybe not, but you have to just hope, and you can't keep digging up the soil to check that it's still alive. You have to just trust in yourself that you've put the work in, and the soil's right, and you've bought the right seeds and all that kind of stuff, that it will bear fruit, or it will come up. It doesn't have to bear fruit yet, but it will. You will see the shoots, and that's huge. That is huge for me. As much as I'm realizing now, I'm a gardener. Because I think I probably thought of myself more as an architect, but I am a gardener. But I've been a gardener who absolutely just demands results straight away, and yeah, I think maybe I haven't been the gardener. Maybe I've been the estate owner who's demanding of the gardener, like you planted these things 5 minutes ago. Why haven't they borne fruit yet? And that's pinging all sorts of things in my head. Like part of what I have to do sometimes is just wait. And now I've got a metaphor for why that is important. And why that inaction is not necessarily inaction. What what I mean? Why that inaction is not inertia? Why not taking action is a good thing? Why letting something, giving it time to germinate, giving it time to
patience and observing and
Yeah.
And relaxing into the seasons is actually activity.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's conscious. It's done with intent. It may be not action, but it's done with intent, and that's that's a helpful thing.
I'm so glad to have met you, Mark. And And Chris, when you said how good you were with building things, I was like secretly so envious. I was just like, Jesus Christ, that man has skills. You know, so we need everybody, because I can't do this on my own.
Yes.
Like people who are practical that help me through.
That's it. Yep.
How do we capture all this wisdom? Because I'm looking at my notes here, and it's like an angsty teenager's little memoir journal. I've written influence/control with/against. What if I'm just another one of my ideas?
Oh wow! Yeah, man, that's a real doozy. I'm copying and pasting the chat into a notes document because I'm hoping that will jog some of my memory of some of the things we've talked about. But it might be useful, Craig, if you don't mind sharing the recording for us at some point.
I'm happy to do that. In fact, I intend to share it not only with the 5 of you, but also with the 2 people who were not able to come.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I will definitely do that.
Just keep pivoting. It's fine.
Did we measure the emergence levels?